icicles forming on the edge of your roof, it might be one of the most popular ways to visually represent winter, but don't be fooled. Icicles can be a sign of a more serious issue. And that's what we're going to be talking about on this episode of In the House. Let's go. In the House is an Any Hour Services podcast where we talk about things homeowners should know when it comes to maintaining and repairing their homes. I'm Mike Wilson, and Shane is going to be helping me out on this episode. He's a manager over the electrical service department at Any Hour Services. Shane, how you doing?
Doing great today, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. So like we talked about, we're going to be talking about icicles forming on the edge of the roof, or what it means, really, because,
what causes it?
Yeah, how are they formed?
Well, icicles on a home, if you look at the inside of a home, we usually keep that, what's the temperature, Mike, normally 68 to 72-ish?
Something like that. Or if you have a wife, probably 70 plus, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77. As warm as she can get it.
There you go. But inside of a house, you have all that heat in the house, and all that heat, where does it go? It goes straight up into your ceiling. That's why we want really good insulation.
Goes into what?
Goes up into the attic, up through your ceiling. And so that heat will also transfer up through your attic and start melting that snow that's on top of your roof. But we have eaves on our house. That keeps the water away from our house. When the water drips off, it doesn't go right on our house. But these eaves are going to be a different temperature than what the rest of our roof is, because that heat isn't going up. There's nothing below it to heat that. So as that water melts off your roof line, it gets to that bottom part where you have this eave part, and it starts to ice up. That'll create icicles. We'll also probably be talking about ice dams a little bit. But that's what it really is, that warmer water coming down and then freezing again, and great big beautiful icicles.
Well, that doesn't actually sound that bad. What's so wrong with that?
That ice gets thicker and thicker. It creates kind of a little spot where water can start to puddle up there. So these are called ice dams.
So explain how that actually happens.
So if on your eave, if you've got 12 inches of ice there, and then you go up another 2 feet and there's no ice at all, it's going to be a lot higher than the part behind it. So as more water melts coming off the roof, you're going to get standing puddles of water up on your roof.
Right. So if you envision what you were describing in the beginning, the heat from the house rises, the water runs off, and as it hits that colder section of the roof that's above the eave, it starts to form ice. But you still have water running down, and it cascades over the ice, causing a thicker layer of ice, right? It's kind of like when you dip a string into wax, right? That's how they form candles. You dip
bigger
it in,
and bigger.
Gets bigger and bigger. And so as that water is coming down off the warmer sections of the roof, it builds up and it gets more and more ice and snows more, and it continues to happen.
Yep.
And then the danger area is when that icy part meets where the heat from the house is actually coming, and that's where you get those puddles of water that are just standing there on the roof like you were talking about. And so why is that a bad thing? I mean, my roof was designed to be out in the weather. It rains all the time, so what's so bad about water on the roof?
Well, water on the roof is designed to go which way, Mike? Up or down?
Down.
Down, off.
Yep.
As soon as we create a puddle up there, an ice dam we call them, you've got a puddle there, and the water starts going back in behind your shingles. So as water goes down your shingles, it's going to protect it. But whenever there's a puddle, it's going to get back underneath them, and then it gets into your house.
Then you get water dripping down into the attic.
People will sometimes see on the inside of their house, or paint will start to sag in a corner where you can see water is coming down. It can also go back behind walls, so you don't see any of the water coming down. You can cause mold damage and stuff in your home from this.
Gotcha. Well, for a long time, I always thought that the only thing that really bothered me about icicles on my house was the section right above my back door, where it would hang over, and you'd end up with a sheet of ice right by the back door. So you keep the bucket of salt right there, and you salt it, but it's really annoying. And so I remember when I first learned about ice dams, and I started looking at those icicles in a totally different light when I saw them. Oh yeah, it's cool because the kids, they love them. They love to go and break them off and use them as popsicles, or sword fight with them, or different things like that. But I didn't realize the potential damage that could actually be happening. And like you said, it can be a slow leak into the house, right? And you might not notice it right away because those drips are gonna drip and soak the insulation. It's going to soak the drywall, then start coming through. And so you mentioned paint bubbling. Do you notice it most, if you've got this issue, do you notice it most on exterior walls, the ones that are closer to where that water would be dripping down?
Most of the time we do. Most of the time your exterior walls are going to be where that water is coming in. But that's a big sign of it, is paint bubbling, because the water is coming in behind where you've painted, and so it's coming and bubbling. You might see it. It almost looks like it's sagging, or it almost looks like your paint's melting.
Right, because when you paint, like it's actually a protective barrier against that sheetrock, and so the same way it's not letting water in to get to the sheetrock, it's also when that water comes down, it gets behind it and it doesn't let it come out, and so you end up with those big bubbles. So is this a problem? Is it more common on roofs that have gutters? Meaning, like, if the water is just draining off, like, does the gutter make it worse because it kind of pools there? Or is it just if you have icicles, there's a chance you've got this happening?
It can happen on both. Like I said, that colder section of the roof, that little eave you have, and some eaves are 12 inches, some are even a little bit bigger. It's going to be colder. So you'll see icicles on gutters, and you'll see big icicles on roofs that have no gutters also. So it's just getting cold enough there to freeze.
Gotcha. What about metal roofs that, they're coming down? Like, do you have an issue with metal roofs as well?
Not as bad on the water getting back in behind it, because it's one solid piece.
The thing that motivated me to like actually be concerned about it was more about the damage to the home, because that is actually way more common. Like I've gone out and installed heat tape just because of that. There was a gentleman in our congregation that, like, he was getting older, and unfortunately he was like preparing to die, but he was going around and doing a whole bunch of things in his house so that his wife wouldn't have to worry about those types of things. And that was one of the things that he was doing, is he in the areas where every year that ice would be like collecting and creating a dangerous sheet for not only her, but like the anyone that came to visit. He put heat tape up to do that. Actually, I guess that's a nice little segue. What is the solution if someone has this issue, or let's say they see icicles and they think, I should probably get that checked out? What's the solution?
We're talking today about ice melt heat tape. It's called by a few different things there. But heat tape is something we install a lot of. It's a heating cable that actually warms up, and we put them in those locations to provide an access way for the water to get off the house. There's no other reason for heat tape except to give it a pathway.
Right. It's not actually there to melt everything off the roof.
Nope.
Because the only issue is that you've got that standing water on the roof, right? If the water's draining off, your house is designed to like be able to take it. And so that just a heat cable that provides a ditch for that water that's in that puddle to drain off of. And so how much does something like this cost?
It can vary depending on the home. Sometimes you just have like that little spot you were talking about that's over a walkway as you're coming into the house, and you just want to do that little spot to keep that off there. You could be in a few hundred. These bigger homes, maybe you have a whole north side facing roof up there. So in Utah, our north side facing roofs, we get a lot of shade there, and we get a lot more ice there.
That makes sense.
So something like that, you could be a few thousand on something like that.
Gotcha. So it's really, there's going to be a big range. Like if the smaller piece that you need to do, the less it's going to cost, and the bigger, it's obviously going to cost a little bit more.
The cool part is we can come out and we can give you options. We can look at the places that are having problems. And maybe you think you're going to need a lot more than you really do, and we can show you that, hey, maybe it's not going to be as bad as you thought it was too.
That's a good point. If someone is interested in getting this done, who typically installs it? Like, is it roofers? Is it plumbers? Who should be installing heat tape?
If it was me, I'd probably be calling an electrician to put up heat tape, just because it is an electrical component. And it's not just the heat tape. There's a lot of other stuff that goes along with it. How do we keep that heat tape safe? There's also special breakers we put on there to keep it. So it is a safe thing to put on the top of your house.
Gotcha. So, if you're outside of the Utah market, you could actually search something like heat tape installation and see what kind of companies come up. If you're in the Utah market, obviously Any Hour Services can help with something like that. And we do free estimates to install heat tape.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So, when they are selecting the company, I mean, just like anything else, it does sound like it's a long-term product that's going to be on the house. So if it's going to be on the home long-term, it sounds like there's just like anything, there's probably a right way and a wrong way to install it. So what do people look for in a company when they're trying to assess who they're going to go with?
I look for somebody respectable who has a good reputation out there. You talk about it being a longer-lived product. Your warranty is only as good as that company that put it in for you.
So true.
So, I mean, it might say it's going to work for 10 years, but if that company's gone in 10 years or after 2 years, so I'd look for somebody who's been around a while, somebody who's done it. Get options out there. Look around, talk to people, talk to your neighbors.
That's a good point. If you see somebody in the neighborhood that has heat tape on, like, ask them, who they used or something like that to start the process. Well, any final advice for somebody that might be, obviously there's some people that are listening to this that are thinking like, oh, I didn't realize icicles could be a sign of this potential problem of leaking into the home and causing damage, all the way to the people that maybe they have like a peripheral, knowledge of what the product is. Any final advice for them?
I just say if you do have great big icicles, get it checked out. If you're starting to see a little bit, like we talked about at the first of the episode, a little bit of paint looking like it's coming off your wall, or where you can see there's been a little bit of water damage, get someone out there quickly, because usually that's a little tip of the iceberg you see. There's usually a lot more damage going on than what you can see. And sometimes you don't see any of it. It's behind your walls. And then you get a puddle in the basement here in Utah where it's gone all the way down your walls. So, but no, be proactive. If you've had the problem last year, have someone out there in the fall before it has ice all over it.
Right. Well, thanks, Shane, for all your input on this, and thanks to anyone that's listening or watching the show. We'll be back next Tuesday with a new episode of In the House. If you'd like to know more about Any Hour Services, visit anyhourservices.com. I've been your host, Mike Wilson, and you've been listening to In the House. See ya.